Hello, we're going to do a little watercolor painting of a seascape, and I have taped down using painter's tape. I think works great. It doesn't pull off the paper, and it's a lot cheaper than artist tape, which is pretty much the same type as this, so it doesn't have nearly as much stickiness to it. Also, I have penciled out, I don't know if you can see it, areas where I have main parts of my waves, just kind of planning it out so I know approximately where each wave is going to hit. And the reason that I'm doing that, I don't always do that, but for watercolors, because I'm going to be using a lot of masking fluid, it helps me to remember where I want the masking fluid to be. Now I have taken a little bit of lifting preparation. This is the Winsor Newton kind for watercolor, and I put it just in the area here where my waves and water and splashing is going to be, because it helps to regain white if you miss a spot with the masking fluid, or if you decide you want a little bit more white of the paper. I like to use as much of the white of the paper as possible, rather than using my zinc white for my splashes of my waves and things, just because I can always use this last resort. So I'm going to use as much of the white of the paper as I can. This you certainly can use, which I will do for my seagulls and probably some touch-ups and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my sand because I need time for the sand to dry, because I'm going to be using some salt in order to create the graininess or rockiness of the beach. Okay, now I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. And I need to work quickly so that I can put my salt down, because once it starts drying, your salt is not going to make enough of a statement. So I'm going to put a little bit more right here, just because my waves are going to crash over my sand, which will okay. I'm going to quickly sprinkle with salt. Okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to let that sit for a little bit, come back, and we will begin again. Okay, now I have applied the salt and let it dry. I used my blow dryer, which blew it around just a little bit just to speed things up. And now I'm going to take a cloth and just scrub off the salt. So what I'm going to do is show you another way you can get some speckles. I'm using some burnt umber. And I'm going to put just a little bit of my yellow ochre, because I want it to be very light. Alright, I'm going to take a little bit of paper towel and protect the area that I don't want to have any splatters. Put that on there. Hold it down. Okay, now I'm going to take I like using my stencil brush, but you can also use a toothbrush. So either one works fine. But I find that I'm a little more accurate with my stencil brush. So you can use your finger. I'm going to do it on my paper towel first just to make sure I got the big drips off. And this gives it a little more definition with some darker flecks, which is nice too. It could be rocks, all sorts of different things in the sand. As you can see, that was really wet because I dunked it in the water, so that's why I like to test it out on my paper towel first. Get an idea of how much. Oops. No big deal. Okay. There we go. I like that just fine. I'm going to blow dry, and I pause my camera while I do this because it's loud. Okay, next I'm going to use some masking fluid, and I'm going to put it in the areas where I want to keep it nice and bright white. So I'm going to use an older brush. There we go. So this is a brush that's seen better days, and so it's great for the art masking fluid. I'm going to just pour it into my palette because if you stick your brush in there, if you have a little bit of paint on your brush, then you end up coloring all of the rest of your masking fluid in there. I don't want that to happen. So pour a little bit in there. Okay, now I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to start applying where I have the majority of my waves and frothiness because I want to keep it nice and white. Now, when it dries, it will become very yellow looking. So, and now I'm not going to worry too much about being super exact because I'm going to be coming in with shadow and other colors and stuff in order to give my frothiness of the waves some depth. So I'm not going to do all of this in front of you because it takes a while to do all that. I'm also going to do my little splashes. So right where, let's see, I've got some splashes going on. Let's see, up in here. This is another thing you can do for splashes using the tip of your paintbrush to get the smaller splashes. Another thing you can do is if you have pointed Q-tips, you can certainly do that. And of course, you can certainly use the finer point of your paintbrush. Now, if you wash your paintbrush right away, a lot of times you can salvage it, but I don't like to risk it. So I always use an older one just in case it doesn't come out real well. So, all right, I'm I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go ahead and put in all my masking fluid, and then I'm going to let it dry. So I will come back to you when I am all finished with that. Okay, we're back. I have put on my masking fluid in a lot of places, as you can tell. And I probably need more. It's a little hard maybe for you to see some little ones, and we'll see how well those work. And I'm going to do the sky before I attack all the waves and everything. Just did a little piece swatch here to show you the difference. If you want some really bright clouds, you can put the lift preparation, the stuff, on ahead of time, and that makes for some really bright clouds, a little more of a defined edge. And then what I would do is come in and put some of the highlights and lowlights, things, I should say lowlights. By the way, this is my brush after using it with the masking fluid. So, yep, a little bit ruined. But then I can come in with a little bit of tone, another color, and put in some shadowing and a little more depth, things like that. A little bright. There we go. So the bright white and the more defined edges for a more of a cumulonimbus cloud. But if I just want kind of one of those soft days where it's bright and they're just very wispy, subtle clouds in the sky, I don't use any lifting preparation, and it works very nicely for just very soft clouds. And one of those hazy summer days. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my brush now and do that. I'm going to go ahead and wet my sky. There. And I like to just try to let a lot of the paint do its own movement. And then I'm going to take a little bit of phthalo blue. It's my favorite color to use for a nice bright sky. And starting up at my top, I'm just going to move it along. Maybe I'll take the tape off when I'm done here. We'll see. A little blob there. I think that's from my accidentally touching my masking fluid. I can pick that off a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to let it do its thing here. And see, I can't stop touching it. I should let it stop. Okay. I'm going to come in sometimes be a little hard to control there. Now I feel like I've overworked it just a little bit too much, but we'll salvage it. Okay, now it's going to dry a little lighter. I'm going to come in while it's still wet, and I'm going to just dab in my clouds. I tend to use paper towel the most because it is absorbent. Sponges are absorbent too, but the texture is a little bit different. And if you feel like it's drying too much, spray a little bit of mist on it, and that can help to move things along a little bit. Okay, I put in a layer here. Thankfully I didn't get too far before my phone turned off. I have so much space on my phone, so I had to upload them to my computer. All right, next what I'm going to do, all I did here was just took a little phthalo blue and a little ultramarine blue and just put in some of the back calmer sections. Now I'm going to be working on one of the waves, and as you can see, some of the splashes are already starting to show through where I put the art masking fluid. Here I put together a little of yellow-green light and a little bit of ultramarine to make some of the greenish tones that are in the wave that the light catches. So I'm just going to be putting some of that in. The only thing I don't like about having lifting preparation on the paper is it does change the texture of the paper just a little bit, because it's already one layer of wetness that you've put on, and then you're painting on top again. So the only thing I don't like is that it tends to react just a little differently. But when you're working with these waves, it's a plus. And that's why I don't put it all over the whole paper, because it does change. It tends to get a little bit more gritty. I don't know if you can see that compared to other areas. But as long as you don't overwork it too much, it should be okay. And it does tend to lift a little bit more, which is the whole purpose of it, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a struggle. All right, now I like that little bit of light coming through as it's splashing over. The next section that I'm doing is kind of the top layer of the next wave that's rolling in. So this is like the top section, and then where you see all this masking fluid is the part that's spilling over, and that's the wavy part. So you'll kind of see it as I'm going about it here. So I'm going to be putting in a lot more blue-green type colors. A little more brighter blue right through there. Okay, now I'm just going to be basically brushing on some of the lighter tones. I'm going to do a little bit more of the bright blue greens. just because as it's splashing up, it catches a lot more of the light than when it's sitting on top. Just trying to get into all those little nooks and crannies of where I left open spaces. Alright, one thing's for sure is there is some sand that's kicked up, so I'm going to be adding just a little bit of some dark tones, some brown tones within. With the blue. It's quite a bit darker through here, so I'm just going to Okay, now what I'm going to do is we have another section, again, of waves that's rolling through. I didn't get much further before I realized it shut off. I just did a little bit of the sand color right here. This is another wave that's coming forward, and it kicked up a lot of the sand in the photo reference I'm looking at for that. So I put a little bit of the sand color there. Now I'm going to be using a little more of the ultramarine blue. Because the next part of it is catching a lot of the some sky colors, and the photo reference, it just doesn't have as much of the green tones in it. So I'm using ultramarine blue, and I'm going to be letting some of that sand come through, because what it is, it's the kind of the frothy end of the water that's coming up on the beach. So I'm going to leave some open areas for the sand. And I'm going to let it mix with some of that sand color, because the water would be very shallow. A blob of it. I'm going to put it right over my Not sure where it's going to come through, so that I can always put in later. And there's just a little smidge of crimson that is showing just at some little edges. Which makes a slight purpley cast, which is really just part of the shadow of all the froth when I put the froth in, but I'm going to put the a little bit of purple tones in right now. Okay, and then lastly, just a slight mix of my ultramarine and my phthalo blue. Okay, let that dry, and then I'm going to take off some of the masking fluid. Okay, so I took off the majority of the masking fluid. I left just a little bit for you to see what you do, and you basically just give a nice, just use your finger to start peeling it away. And as you can see, it left a lot of very nice white areas, which aren't going to stay white because I will be putting in some highlights and lowlights and things like that to make the depth of the froth. Before I do that, right now I'm going to take a little bit of my zinc white, and what I started to do before, I'm going to be, that's a little bit drier. This is the reflection, the light reflection in the very little bits of the water that are left. Now I'm going to put in, using my zinc white, some of the frothiness. Of the wave that's closest to here. And it wasn't real white, so I didn't bother with making, putting the masking fluid there. So I'm just going to put it in with my zinc white. just kind of the part that's rolling in, just a little bit of frothiness. Satisfied with that? All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to putting some of the shadows and things into my waves that are here. And once again, I'm going to be using my ultramarine blue. And I want it to be fairly light. I'm just going to keep doing that, coming in and putting in the shadowed areas. I will be putting in a little bit of the phthalo blue in some areas. It just depends on how the light is hitting and the water and things like that. So up here where the water is more green and I want the water to be showing through some of my splashes, I'm going to be doing the more green colors. And down here where it's filling in, I'm using the more ultramarine blue and just a little bit of phthalo blue in some areas too, just so that I have a little more depth of color. Okay, now I'm going to come in with, put in my shadows and the light, and then started to do a little bit of the froth right here, but I think it's going to show up just a little bit better if I use a little bit of my zinc white. So, and this is where you can start to add in lots of the little flicks and flecks and little things like that. So, just going to add some more. And remember, I did have some art masking fluid in some of these areas, but sometimes it just, they're so tiny that it just didn't do the trick. So adding some of those elements in for some of those little smaller specks. So mostly I used tones of gray, ultramarine blue, and some green just to make the shadows and some of the water showing through and some of it. Okay, I'm just going to finish up adding in some of those details, and I will be back with you. Okay, so after putting in all the shadows and the shades of greens and blues that are showing through the turbulent surf, I then came in and I put some waves just beginning to roll over on the very back, very serene waves. So they haven't exploded yet, but they're just starting to turn. So I put some highlights on there. And then of course I put the birds in, and I just used the zinc white, not titanium, but zinc white. Drew them out, painted them in, and just add little gray tones. And then lastly, I put, using my zinc white once again, I put the little bit of the roll coming in on the waves there to show the directional line and the flow that's in the photo. And that's just about it. Signed my name, took off the tape, and there you have it. Finished picture.